Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really appreciative of your time. We're wanting to talk to you today about men's mental health, especially coming up to Men's Mental Health Awareness Month in November. And we want to introduce ourselves. This is Karen.
Hi.
I'm Olly, and we're both senior counsellors at the Counselling Centre in Tunbridge Wells. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah. Okay. So Matt, so you are a journalist, also
Yes.
a novelist, and you have now written Man Down, your non-fiction book. So we were wondering, what's the difference between those different types of writing, and which, if any, have you enjoyed the most?
Such a good question. I don't enjoy writing at all. Maybe we need to have a session after this where you help me come to terms with that. No, I'm joking. I like writing. But Man Down, which I wrote 3 years ago now, it came out of a conversation I was having at the Sunday Times magazine. We were doing a lot of really great stories about women's mental health, and pieces by great female authors about the struggle to have it all or to balance things. And after a few of these, I put my hand up in an editorial meeting and said, very shockingly, but what about the men? And the editor said, well, go away and talk to some men. So I talked to some friends at first, and these are really good friends who I've had for decades. And I realized in the conversation, we'd never had a serious conversation about life. It was anything that got serious was immediately deflected by humor. And so I sort of sat them down and said, I wanted to feature on men's mental health. Can we have a serious conversation? And within about 3 questions, we were having the most real conversation we'd had in years. And so it spun from that. I wrote the article, then the article became a book. And the response to that has been fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, we sort of noticed in the book that there are sort of a lot of touches of humour, and we're sort of wondering about that.
Deflecting, always deflecting. It's such
mm-hmm.
I think it's, obviously men and women use humour, but it's definitely used as a defence by men. And what I should say at the start of this conversation is, if I do a sweeping generalisation about men versus women, that's purely by accident.
Understood. Yeah, and we think, sometimes understand that defensive technique, but is it a way of making this tolerable? Is the humour a way of making these difficult conversations sort of more palatable or more accessible for people?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest problem men have is that to admit fragility, weakness, that you are struggling is still a real problem. Regardless of the strivings we've made towards equality, it's very difficult for men, I think in particular, to ask for help, to admit that they're struggling. And so humour is a way of just taking the temperature down and making things feel easier. I'm guilty of that. I was guilty of it before the book. I still am. But it's really interesting to me how quickly men do, and you may have found this in your own experience, when you do get men coming to you for help, they've obviously gone through a big hurdle to come to you in the first place. But actually they do very quickly open up and can talk about things, it's just that first step is so difficult for many different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're interested, as you being a father of boys, we were wondering about sort of what are your hopes for how you can talk to them, engage with them on sort of these kind of issues, talking about feelings.
I've got 3 boys. The eldest is 18, the youngest is 11, and I think obviously today there's a lot more discussion about mental health for boys in schools in particular. I mean, my kids always coming back from school having been dragged through some kind of mental health discussion with their teachers, which is great. But obviously on the other side of that, they've got the evil internet and all of that stuff going on. And I should say that all these cues and discussions on mental health come, as is often the case, from my wife, who is far further down the road in all of this stuff than I am. What we did is just a tiny tip, is very humiliating thing for any parents of younger children listening, but when they kind of got to 13 or 14, my wife and I would sit them down for a serious conversation about what it means to become a man. And we talked about all the embarrassing bodily stuff, but also what we expected from them as a human being and as a potential partner of someone as they got older. This all comes from how the Swedish do it. They're very, very open about mental health and sex and all of that stuff. So we did that. Very embarrassing for me as a repressed man who did all the sort of growing up in the 1980s. And then we take them for a nice meal. And that was actually really amazing, because since then, they kind of tend to come to us with problems. That may stop, but it seems to have worked until now.
That's wonderful. And one thing we're wondering is
does that give me points? Did I do well?
Yeah. We're keeping a tally on the side.
Okay, all right, fine.
We were wondering what have the boys taught you about feelings and talking and life?
I hope they don't watch this. I would think that I'm still quite shut down, and they want to have discussions, and when they have fragile moments, I still kind of push towards the stiff upper lip, you'll be fine. I know that's not the right thing to do, but obviously they have to fit into the system. They have to turn up at school, they have to then probably go to university, they then have to get on the career ladder. There's all these expectations, and I worry that if I drill into that and make them feel like that system is not the best, then they'll struggle, because unfortunately you have to do that. And my wife would be saying, no, you don't, you can go your own way, but I'm not quite there yet.
So you maybe recognize the sort of systemic flaws in the system, but also know that the boys will need to live in it.
Yeah, and the systemic flaws is, I mean, that's a very big question, but it is a problem. For the reason that I wrote that book is because I'd done everything that society had expected of me. I'd done well at school. I'd then gone to university. I'd then got on the career ladder. I'd then found a partner and had kids and gone up the career ladder. And then I hit my 40s. And as you'll know, 45 to 50 is kind of the absolute depths of, that's the real low point, because you're at that age where you're suddenly feeling your own mortality. Your parents are getting older. And you're also, you reach a point where you either can continue climbing the career ladder, or you can try and settle, but settling is frowned upon. And for me, that I suddenly look back on everything and I realized I hadn't stopped at all from age whatever. The first time you get a gold star age 4 at primary school, it's just one target after another, plowing on and no chance to stop. And the most frightening thing is the thought of what would happen if you did stop. And I still struggle with that, because, and so do all the people I spoke to, or many of the people I spoke to in the book. Would you consider therapy? Would you consider going to the counselling centre? No, I can't possibly. I've got to keep going. I've got dependents. I've got a mortgage. I've got to keep up appearances. So it's that fear of just thinking about things. I have one friend in particular, a very successful guy, but but not happy. I'm not going to name him, he'll know who he is. And it clearly needs to have some conversations, if not with professionals, then with friends. But he just absolutely couldn't do it. So we continue with our humorous conversations as deflection.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's interesting you mentioned your like 4-year-old self getting that first gold star. I wanted to ask, if you could, what would you say to little Matt, if you could now, with the sort of wisdom that you have now?
That's a really good question, but what have I got to complain about now? I've done all right, and I would be worried about, flicking that little kid slightly off track. But I definitely wish I put in a little bit more time just to stop and think. And I have got better at that in the course of writing the book and then meeting people like yourselves. I've almost by accident forced myself into asking some of the questions that need to be asked. So I would also really try and challenge the obsession with external validation, which has been a huge thing for me. I write a column in the Sunday Times every week, and unfortunately we allow our wonderful readers to comment on those columns, and if they're nice, I feel great, and if they aren't, I don't. And that has been the same. I picked quite an egotistical career in writing and journalism. The times that I've really been happiest, though, have not had anything to do with what other people think of my writing. It really is. I was so cynical and suspicious of people like yourselves talking about living in the present and not being not being obsessed by external validation. But I've literally things like walking in the woods and counting your own blessings, small things like that have been happier moments. And I don't want to monologue too much, but the guy I met in the book, who was the happiest person I've ever met, has not been on a career path at all. So maybe I would say to 4-year-old Matt, go and live in a caravan next to Loch Ness for the next 27 years. And so you did you get to the end? Very impressive. Testing you. Yeah, so it's the final. I don't know if it was the final. Towards the end of the book, so well done. I met this guy who has lived next to Loch Ness for 27 years. It'll be 30 years now, if he's still there. And people like me have interviewed him over the years, and he's always been portrayed as a bit of a kook. He's the Loch Ness monster hunter, so we all know that's a bit crazy. But I spent a long time talking to him, and he wasn't there because he was obsessed with finding the Loch Ness monster. He just decided, he could see that he was getting on the career path that is expected of all of us, to get a mortgage. He just found a girlfriend, a long-term girlfriend. He was starting a business with his father. It was all, he could just see he was locked in for the next 4 or 5 decades. And he wasn't happy. Well, he was settling. So he just decided he loved going as a child on holiday to Loch Ness. So he decided he would go and spend some time there and never left. And he spoke to me about things like the shifting lights across the water, or the moon, or a wind front coming across. And he was clearly living in the present, which we're all supposed to do. And it just sounded, a day in his life sounded so much better than any day I'd ever had. And there I go, comparing myself to others, and the grass is always greener, right? So that's another cross.
And so thinking about what you were able to do with him, I know you interviewed him, but it sounds like you also gave him space to talk, space to be heard. And on that kind of front, I was wondering what your thoughts are around the world of counselling.
Well, I have had minimal experience of it. I've done men's groups. I've had a few counselling sessions, and I think, we're doing this for, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and there will hopefully be men listening to this who will find the whole thought of therapy or counselling quite intimidating, or maybe even labeling that if you sign up to something like this, there must be something wrong with you. And I think there needs to be a first step. I think what happens is people like me leave it, and people like me, I mean men, leave. They don't think about their mental health until they're forced to. I don't know if that's your experience as well. I think women tend to be more open, and this is a generalization through the generalization klaxon, but women tend to be more open. They talk more authentically with their friends, and they're more likely to seek help earlier, whereas men tend to wait for something really bad to happen before they do. For me, in order to get to the point where I would come and talk to someone like you guys, was forced on me by saying, oh, I'll do a story, I'll do a book about men's mental health. And it was those conversations in pubs with a simple rule that you're not allowed to take the piss. And suddenly we had as I say, these authentic conversations. So that for me was the step to then. I'm not going to sit here and tell you two that counselling's a waste of time. I genuinely don't think it is. I just think it's very hard for men to get to a point where they would phone you up and book an appointment.
And thinking about, that difficulty that some men might face, the barriers that might be perceived. I wonder, from your point of view, and also from the information you garnered from the people you spoke with, what you feel those barriers might be.
It's those big societal barriers that it's a weakness to say you need help, and you are still, you're the provider. It's Victorian mentality still, but you're the man, you need to be strong, all of those things that are. And by the way, I don't think it's any easier. It certainly isn't for women. Women are taught still in school to be quiet. Well, we all are, to be quiet and well behaved, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think I don't know if I gave this as an example, but I did speak to a doctor friend who said, so this is physical health rather than mental health. That they have the doorknob question. So you get your 10 minutes NHS appointment, you spend 9.5 minutes talking about, you've got something sore on the side of your eye, and then as you're leaving, you say, oh, and also, by the way, my testicles have turned blue. So you struggle to go in and have an honest conversation about what you came in for, and then if you're lucky, you get out as you're leaving. So it's crazy. And since I have started, talking more about this, it does seem crazy that we have these barriers. But we know from, without wishing to get suddenly very dark, we know from the suicide rates that men do not take action, do not seek help until it's in those cases, very sadly, too late.
Well, it's just like you said before about placing that rule when you were talking with those men. You're not allowed to take the mic, you're not allowed to laugh. This is a judgment-free zone, and that's very much what the world of counselling is trying to provide. And I wondered, again, from your experience, your point of view, dealing with those barriers, what you think might help give someone the agency to face them and to seek support.
Yeah, we've been having lots of conversations about that. I mean, maybe this is a question that I should ask you, because you obviously see male and female patients. Do we call them patients?
Clients.
Thank God, because that would have been stigmatizing, wouldn't it? So you see a lot more. I know this. You see a lot more female clients than male clients. So what is the difference? I'm going to ask you to generalize. You can't go into specifics, obviously, but do women find it easier to get to the issues than men, or what?
I think it's mixed. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the doorknob moment. Was it Ben, the doctor that you
Yeah.
And so we definitely experience those from our clients. We have 50-minute session and we're talking away about lots of things, and yet often they say it's the thing that's said as they're leaving, as they're putting their coat on, that's been the real thing they need to talk about. And it takes that, it can feel so dangerous that it can be almost they just chuck it at you as they leave. But it's a start. It's unlike a GP appointment where it's over. For us, we've got the next week. We can give them the time to go from throwing it in the last second to doing the last 5 minutes of the session, or two, so we've got a chance to build, if we've kind of built that kind of safe base for them to start from. I know they don't have to come in day one and give us the big stuff. They can give us all of the side quests before they get to the real meat of the story, and we're luckily able to offer longer term counselling where they have time to build up to it, because we know men and women, but yeah, men especially can struggle to sort of lay it all out until they trust us.
Yeah, you did say men especially. It's definitely our special thing that we do struggle to be open, and I do think I know it's just because I did it. I'm sure there are other things, but certainly if you are out, I keep saying the pub, but it might be you might have a cycling group, or you do whatever it is you do. You're away for a weekend with mates. I do think that it's worth trying let's all have a serious chat, because I've done the men's groups things, but you're there without your friends, and that can feel, I think, more intimidating than a one-to-one counselling session. But forcing your friends, because we've got, at my age in particular, you whittle down your friends, but you have a few, a handful of really close friends, but you may well never have had a serious conversation with them. And the other thing is, and you may have a perspective on this, is at what point do you seek counselling, seek help? And I would say for me, I wish I'd done it, in my early 30s or in my mid 20s. Not that there was anything wrong with me, but it would have forced me to just stop and think and speak to someone like you guys, and almost like a checkup, an MOT, rather than waiting to hit the horrific 45 to 50 age bracket. Neither of you are anywhere near that, clearly, but trust me, by which point you definitely need some help. So yeah, I would say earlier the better. My plan, if I was doing it again, go on the bike ride or the weekend away, force your poor friends to have a serious conversation with you, joke free, and phone the counselling. Now this is sounding like an advertorial, but anyway, we phone you guys next and have a 50-minute session, and then you're probably fine. It's a one thing, or it's you do it more regularly. Just don't leave it until you're my age.
Absolutely. And in fact, the sort of studies that have been done have shown that early intervention can be really helpful, but that's not to say that there's ever a point where it's too late. In fact, there are much increased rates of people accessing counselling much later in life as well, sort of in the 60s, 70s, people realising that it's not too late to bother. that actually at any point having a space to talk and examine your feelings and have a place to just speak freely is valuable at every stage. So we don't want people to feel like it's, you know, you've missed the boat on getting that kind of help.
And on that, when you said early intervention, the word intervention makes it sound like there needs to be something, we need to get involved with this person because something's going wrong. But at what point do you think someone should go for counselling? Because I'm moving towards the point where you know, if I was Prime Minister, I would say everyone should, you know, we all are supposed to go and have a physical checkup, you know, every few years. Wouldn't it be great if everyone had a mental health checkup, even if it's a 15-20 minute how are you feeling, you know, next type thing, which is obviously would be a lot for on a national scale. But how mentally unwell, or at what point do you need to come and see people like you? Or do you agree with me that just might be a good idea if you're feeling quite anxious and stressed with life? And for men, and obviously women too, at that point most people would think, no, come on, just get on with it. Perhaps it would be better at that point to come and book an appointment.
I think it's really dependent on, you know, each individual. You know, people experience all sorts of things in their lives at different stages. It also, you know, like Karen said, I don't think it has to be age dependent. You could, like you said, maybe go for a mental health checkup at one age for a period of time, see how you feel. But it doesn't mean you can't return. You know, you might have many years where you're feeling you can cope and you've managed to take some of those coping mechanisms with you, but later on in life feel like, well, actually something else has come up that I'd like to talk about. So I think it's absolutely down to the individual. It doesn't have to be a case of mental health crisis. It can just be a space for someone to think about how they deal with things, think about why they feel the way they do. It doesn't have to be a crisis at all. And that can just help them develop tools to carry on coping.
Great.
I think, yeah, and as you say, it's the difference between sort of going to A&E because you've had something very serious has happened, you need urgent help, compared to just sort of taking care of your body. Maybe, you know, some clients have talked about it. It's like the mind gym. It's actually something, you're not going there because you're not coping. You're actually investing in yourself. You know, the same way we might take care of our car, but we could replace that, our body and our mind. We've just got the one. So it's actually investing in ourselves rather than being unable to manage. It's actually sort of seeing that your worth and everyone around you who who you care for and are looking after, that they are worth you taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that's brilliantly put. And it is amazing, given, you know, how many hours we spend working and how many hours we spend running families or all the other activities we do, that, you know, it seems ludicrous. And also the number of hours a lot of people spend down at the gym on working on their buff bodies. I'm not one of those people, but seems ludicrous that we're not spending a bit of time on the mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're thinking about the connections you've made, sort of speaking to all the men in the book, and we're wondering how you feel about having sort of perhaps even by accident become this sort of touch point for so many men to share their stories.
Entirely unqualified, as I said before we started taping this. It's been really great. There have been a few examples of people who've written to me who have read the book and then come to people like you, and it's had a happy ending. It's been very surprising how many women have got in touch about a book called Man Down, because you know, you would expect to hear from men, obviously, but actually a lot of partners of men bought the book to clobber their partners with. And I think there was one case where written something about, it might have been about the doorknob thing, and a woman wrote to me and said she left that part out for her husband to read because he'd been having chest pains for weeks, and was, every time she brought it up, he just shushed her and carried on. And then she left this section out for him to read. He read it, and because it was coming from someone other than the person who loved him most in the world, he went to the doctor and had life-saving heart surgery. So I have literally saved lives with this, but I'm joking. But
No.
I mean, how ridiculous that there's some bloke with chest pains not listening to the person who's observing him, and then goes to see the doctor because some random guy's written about how ridiculous men are not to go and get help. So there's all of that. The only other thing is, back when Twitter was good, probably shouldn't say that, we're probably going to put this on Twitter. X is fantastic. Twitter was great. I'm so pleased it's now called X. But all of the messages of thanks for the book and that sort of stuff were on private message, not on the public forum, which is absolutely fine. I couldn't give a monkey's. X is brilliant. It's terrible, but so men were happy and they were asking me questions and all of that, but in private they were not willing, understandably I think, to talk about mental health and their own issues in a public forum.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I suppose in the counselling room, perhaps more of the men that we see, they're maybe not sharing that so much, the fact that they're seeing a counsellor. Some are, which is great, but I've definitely had people sort of like, oh no one knows I come here. So even when they're saying this is really helping me, I feel better, they're not able to share that with their peers who could maybe benefit as well. So whereas perhaps more.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but why do you think that is? Because you would imagine if someone was coming to you and it was working, that would be something to tell friends about. But from my point of view, I'd be worried about an employer. I mean, I've made it quite difficult to hide the fact that I've been talking about mental health with my employer, but I can imagine a lot of people would be reluctant for it to become public knowledge. But why do you think we're so cloak and dagger about therapy?
I mean, I agree. I think there's something very private, obviously, about therapy and what happens in the room. But yes, there are fears around what others will think or what employers will think. And I suppose we're trying to turn that around of like, actually, from an employer, they've got an employee who is investing and taking care of themselves. They're much more likely to be able to work effectively, to manage their stress, to be a good team player if they're investing in their own health. So we really want to switch that kind of concept of it being something to be embarrassed about to be something should be bragging about.
Yeah, because I mean, the obvious comparison, if you broke your leg, you wouldn't hide the fact that you'd got a splint, not a splint, what are they called anyway? It's I mean, it is crazy that it's still a taboo, and I don't know what it would take to change that. But I do think the world we're in now is stressful. I mean, that's from my own experience, but all of the technology around us and the nature of our work is changing. We're quite sedentary. So I think you're more likely to have mental health issues than, quite subtle mental health issues like stress, building up stress and anxiety, than physical issues. So the idea of seeking help for that just seems to be a no-brainer, is what I should have said to my 28-year-old self.
I'm wondering, with the men that you spoke to, obviously you had lots of different stories. What was one thing that really surprised you to hear?
You're testing me now, because it was 3 years ago. I think I think just to reiterate the point that surprised me was how open men were to talk. So if someone like me turned up and said, can I interview you for a book about your mental health, I expected to get the same kind of, nervousness about things that we've just been discussing. But actually, what we should be saying in this whole part of this conversation is that once people do start talking, it's really amazing how similar all of our experience, regardless of what walk of life we're in, how similar the kind of stresses and strains of life are. And it's what was surprising and actually a relief for me is that it wasn't just me going quietly mad for no reason. All the other people that I was talking to were also struggling in the same areas, and people who I thought, oh, they're doing really, really well. They have got it all nailed down, work-life balance, on great marital relationship. Their kids seem so well adjusted and success, doing really well. It's all that stuff, and then you talk to them, and they're feeling all the same kinds of things as I was. So there was that communal sense of we're all in this together was a big relief. And I think if you stopped most men on the street, they would say they've got a fairly special set of struggles that no one else would understand if they were even to get that far in sort of replying to you.
Yeah. So there's almost a sort of, it's the embarrassment, the sort of the embarrassment of having these feelings, that this secrecy that no one else has them, is actually, it's deadly. It's, it's literally life and death around these issues, where if people can recognize that these are common things that others are feeling. I think it's a bit like where things have improved a bit with people who are pregnant, and the more open conversation around postnatal depression, and as is in the book, obviously that happens to men too, that these things have become more spoken about, mostly amongst women, that actually recognizing that the shame of feeling like you're the only one who feels that way is the dangerous part. Recognizing that lots of people feel this way is the first step towards working through it.
That's right, but the issue is, and the reason when I was nervous when I said what about men in that editorial meeting, because that's an eye roll. You're going to get an eye roll response to that from women, because obviously we're in a society created by men for men. So what on earth have we got to complain about? And I think that's how a lot of men feel, and many of us share our lives with women, and we're all very well aware of everything that women face. And it's the idea of saying, oh, but it's really tough for men, but it's not a competition. And I know from the warm responses from women about this book that women don't feel irritated by men seeking help for mental health. Quite the opposite. They're literally, and I imagine it's your experience too, that quite a lot of your male clients come as a result of, I don't know, being given a flyer or something by their partners. You're not going to give me specifics, though. You're going to be all professional and say, well, they're all our clients. It depends on the individual client. But I imagine you've got some men have been pushed through the door by their partners. I'm going to say that because I'm not a professional.
Absolutely, and that happens. But it's about what do you do next? I think we can work with that. Some people will come and for lots of reasons say a partner or their employer or a parent has sent them there, but they're in the room, and once they're in the room with us, we have that opportunity to work with that, and that's okay. If it's moving on to the next step from there. So we'll take that. If they were pushed, they still showed up, and that's all we ask.
I think the other thing is that men I keep saying men, but that's what we're talking about. But it might feel almost indulgent to say, I would like to talk about myself to people like you for 50 minutes. I mean, that seems, that level of self-care might be construed as quite self-indulgent, which again, I would say, having done a bit of it and having spoken to a lot of counsellors, that it isn't. It makes complete sense. If you spend that many hours in fitness classes, you can do a little bit on the more cerebral side of things.
Yeah, and we would say that the sort of self-care is actually sometimes the most selfless thing you can do, because when you have that self-care for yourself, everybody around you benefits. Which actually sort of leads on. We wanted to ask, what sort of some of your, if it's not too kind of gauche to say, what do you do, Matt, for self-care?
I think we're going to have to release this in a week where my wife is not on the internet, because I'll get shouted at. Help. No, because she says not enough. I'm still at, struggle to, I'm still a little bit like the friend I mentioned who clearly needs help, but just thinks if he stops, the plate's spinning, it'll all come crashing around. I've tried absolutely everything. I've done all the apps. I've done all the various types of yoga and meditation and all of those things. The one thing that I've kind of stuck with quite religiously over the last 5 years is this is just such a yawn, but is what we trendily call forest bathing, but which means basically, as you'll know, going for a walk in the woods and just stopping and having even a few minutes, not on the phone, not listening to a podcast, just being still with your thoughts. And if I'd said to my 30-year-old self that my 40-something self would be doing that, he would have been very cynical. It's very skeptical. But actually, it just, even after a very busy day or a stressful week, I just find that's a really successful little hack for me. Do you not need your just professional mental health? You're like the black belts of mental health, so you don't need, or you do you, what's your top thing? Go on.
Well, I think we probably would have first admit sometimes we can be terrible hypocrites. We can know what everyone should do and help them work on that, and sometimes neglect our own. But it's interesting to work forest bathing, because I have a bridle path very near where I live, which I walked along a lot in COVID and still now, and I'm in the trees and there are often squirrels. That is the sight of a squirrel running up a tree will do me for the morning.
Really, that is such a low bar, and that's all it takes, and you're fine after that.
I mean, for at least a little, it definitely helped. I've never seen a squirrel and not smiled for at least a moment. So that's sometimes that's my quick hit when I haven't got a lot of time.
Even though it's an invasive species that has destroyed native red squirrel.
I mean, but aren't we all invasive species? But I mean.
Perfect. Very good point. And Olly, what do you do?
Well, I find it's quite interesting for me, because just like Karen says, it's really easy to focus on others. I don't know if you found this actually when speaking to some of the people you interviewed, being able to give them, focus in on them, give them space actually can feel quite nice for us. Almost a little bit of a distraction from whatever it is we might be dealing with at that time. And what I've noticed for myself is obviously going to my own personal therapy, but not necessarily that having to be something that is done forever, all the time. I even had a bit of a break and have started up again. So I think that's really powerful. What you were talking earlier about being, that feeling of self-indulgence, of being able to have 50 minutes a week just to think about yourself, because one thing I really garnered from your book was how it felt as though so many people are quite low on their own priority list. You know, they don't make their own top 10. You know, they're, like you were saying before, they're thinking about their family, their partner, the mortgage, the job, and then maybe themselves if, you know, they can fit. But I think a lot of people really struggle with that. So for me, it's about, even if it's just 50 minutes a week, being able to find some time for yourself is really, really important. And it can really help just put all those other things that can feel overwhelming and build up, put them into a bit of perspective and help you kind of process them. So yeah, I wondered if, you know, from your perspective, and I know you said you've had some experience there too, but what you feel would kind of help you think about the possibility of counselling for yourself.
Yeah, I think, so for me, and I have done therapy, but very small bouts of it, and it was not the self-indulgence that was the barrier, it was time.
Mm-hmm.
Time was the biggest barrier. And I think what you've just said about the, you know, yourself as a priority being a very long way down the list is also key. This kind of mad, almost hunter-gatherer perspective to life that men have, putting themselves right at the end. And there was a case in the book about a 40-year-old guy who took his own life because of financial concerns, and his partner didn't know the half of it. And that's a perfectly horrific example of how this idea that you're not a priority, you've got to look after everyone else, you've got to keep going. If that doesn't go well, you know, it's an extreme example, but it happens all the time. Things are going to go very, very badly indeed. And that's way, way more horrific for the people around you, the people that you've been prioritizing above you, than if you'd gone and spoken to anyone about things. So I think there's a lot going on there, Olly. It's pride, busyness, feeling like it's not necessary, all of those things that stop people. Pride being a big one, actually. I'm thinking of, the people I started with in this book, as I said, were my mates, who are all, far more successful than I am, city blokes coming up from Tunbridge Wells, where you're based, doing the 40 years on the commute, and all of that, doing really well. So on paper, big ticks all around, well done, got the gold star, and yet, questionable on the happiness front. So, but I don't think any of them would have considered counselling before we started having conversations that continued, and for some of them evolved into more serious help.
So in terms of, there's different barriers. There's something around the idea of it, almost the branding around counselling, about this being something that actually requires strength. It's not a weakness. I don't want to put anyone off, but counselling's hard work. It's not the easy option. You have to really, you have to work really hard at it. So if pride is a thing, then it's something about being proud of investing in yourself. But if we know that logistically time feels like an issue as well, perhaps there's something around, could there be, sort of more pocket-sized, smaller interventions? Could there be sort of 15-minute sessions, check-in sessions, something that kind of makes it more accessible to people really busy on that treadmill?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been discussing actually at the counselling centre. Some of the conversations we've had as I've been learning about the centre, maybe we need to do it in a kind of, like the Catholic confessional box where I can sit in one on one side and there's a screen. That's possible, so I don't have to look either of you in the eye when I say how unhappy my childhood was or whatever it is. But yeah, I think 50 minutes is hard. I've done it. It's quite tired. I mean, it's powerful. It really is powerful. But I don't know. Can you achieve much in 15 minutes? I would assume that would be more, obviously a lower bar than doing a full session. But what would you say?
Well, what we're saying is if there are a group of people who will not access those full sessions, then anything you can do must be tried. If the answer is that they won't engage at all, then perhaps we do need to think about other ways, even if it's just kind of building people up to it. And say, and if you don't want to look us in the eye, that's why Freud had a couch. So that's been well known. Not everyone wants to be able to see us, and that's fine.
I think a couch is, I mean, I think a couch is kind of a really intimidating, lying down. That's vulnerable. I think I'd like to stand. I'm obviously going to book a session with both of you separately after this, but I'd like to stand in the corner. Maybe that's how we'll start it. No, I'm being silly, but I think maybe people listening to this conversation, men who are reluctant or think they're fine, but are, slightly intrigued by some of the things we've discussed today, can get in touch and just let us know if a 4-minute counselling session would be more preferable to a 50-minute one. Personally, I think if you've summoned however we would describe it, the courage is probably not right, but you've decided actually you do want to MOT your mental health by coming to the centre, you've crossed the difficult barrier by then, and maybe just go for the full session. But before then, try and have some proper conversations with your friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, like you said before as well, sometimes it can be quite difficult to talk to the closest ones to you because of how you might worry about worrying them. So, being able to come to a counsellor and who at first is essentially a complete stranger to you, you're not having to worry about their feelings and their thoughts. That can really invite a space that is a lot more free from shame, completely non-judgmental. So maybe that's something we need to try and put out there for men to realize is possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Although I think in the course of writing the book and as we discussed in the response to it, it's my experience that the people around men who seek help are very, very encouraging of that, and that's certainly the case in my household. That is, there's more enthusiasm from the people around us than ourselves.
And encouragement, it feels as though there's more encouragement to do that rather than extra shame that we might be holding ourselves.
Well, who wants to live with a stressed, anxious, miserable, grumpy, short, etc. bloke? I mean, I must imagine that must be hell. I'm sure if my wife had to live with someone like that, she would find it very difficult indeed. Confusing.
It reminded me. There was an advert, I won't say the brand, I can't remember it luckily, for a holiday, and it was about the sort of the Ogre Dad, and it was this family holiday, and it starts off with the dad of the family is literally an ogre, and over the holiday he sort of slowly starts to relax, and on the last day of the holiday he's really happy. And I think this was meant to be encouraging in some way, and I thought it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen, this idea that sort of he took all holiday to finally become like a nice part of the family, and then they went home again. And I thought we must be looking for more than just, sort of working all year to pay for a holiday to then barely be able to get through before you enjoy it. We want more happiness for everyone.
Yeah, I mean that is, I remember that, and that's a great depiction of the father on holiday, isn't it? How fantastic. And I have to say, I'm off work this week, and I haven't had a week off since early summer, and I immediately got ill on it. We're talking on a Thursday, and I've been knocked for 6 until yesterday. So that's fantastic as well, isn't it? You know, I've not been able to do everything I should have been doing, because the minute I switch off, I mean, it can't be a coincidence. We'll talk about this in the session I'm going to book, but it's so frustrating, and I don't think dads, men, anyone wants to be kind of using time away from work to recover from work. But as I think I mentioned, maybe it wasn't in this book, maybe it was something else, but the peak stress for men in the working week is actually I'm going to scuff this up because I haven't thought about it for a while, but for fancy executives, so people who run companies, that sort of thing, the peak moment of stress in their week is not during the working week, it's Sunday morning, because their Monday is approaching, but they're too far away to actually think, right, I can get on and sort something out. So they're most miserable on Sunday morning, which is really mad. That was one of the craziest studies I'd ever read.
I mean, that sounds like the Sunday morning really takes away their agency, because they might want to, be planning things to feel active, to feel like they're making a difference. And like you say, the distance from Sunday morning to Monday isn't allowing them to do anything proactive. And I think as well, being able to talk, whether it's like you say with your friends, whether it's with a counsellor, that's you taking agency to decide to do something about how you're feeling. And I think that is a really important area for all of us to think about, that we have agency to do that.
Yeah. And then we're getting towards the end of this, but let's assume some people who watch this aren't going to immediately book an appointment to come and see you guys. What can you give me, people watching this, some simple advice for now? We're in approaching Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. I mean, as if we should have a specific. No, it's a good thing. It's good to raise awareness, but that's the month. Give me some top tips.
Well, I think, firstly, it's around.
Go on. I interrupted.
I think it's about it's listening, and I think it's interesting. You talked about a lot of the men kind of almost not wanting to even sort of contemplate the issue of happiness. Well, I can't think about that. It's too. And the first bit, although a bit scary, is actually stopping and thinking, as you said, being able to listen to your thoughts when all the noise is switched off. 5 minutes of just the phone off, kind of sitting, kind of checking in with yourself. How am I feeling? And so we've got that kind of, that's one end of the spectrum, is just checking in literally over the length of a cup of tea, being with yourself. But
Okay,
I think
I'm interrupting because I'm now getting to ask the questions. What do you mean check in with yourself? What does that, how do I, just talk me through? Is it, so it's not doing anything else is obviously that's the environment. So you're in a quiet place, you're not watching EastEnders. Then what? Are you doing this all in your head, or are we having a conversation in a mirror, or be specific?
Okay, and it is specific to different people, and I've talked, some people would absolutely be, would find it far too difficult to look in the mirror and say, "Hey Matt, how you doing?"
Oh, yeah,
So it needs, sometimes it's internal, but it can just be that sort of thing of like you're sitting, you're comfortable, you're being aware of your senses. So you're giving yourself a comfortable place. You've maybe got a cup of tea if that's what you like. You're warm enough. You haven't got uncomfortable shoes on. You're looking after yourself, and then you're like, okay, noises are going off. What's going on? How am I? It's just sort of very simple questions, nothing too deep. Does anything hurt physically? Is my heart going fast? Is there a lot going on in my head? Is the hamster wheel going? Can I just sort of see where I am, just to sort of, like you would with the family at the breakfast table? How you doing, to the kids and all that. You're just doing that with yourself. You're giving yourself
Love
that.
it.
And it's literally 5-10 minutes, no more. It's not a big expectation, but it's like recognizing that first step of, I am worth a few minutes of checking in on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you said that was one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
What was at the other end?
Well, I think that what's important, we've all talked here about how serious some of this stuff around men's mental health especially, but everyone's being, we need to talk about risk. And if you're at the other end of that spectrum and you are feeling incredibly overwhelmed and you're feeling at risk of harming yourself, it's knowing that what the emergency end of the line is. And in fact, so Olly and I have in the past, we're both Samaritan volunteers for years. And there's something we call sort of the dark night of the soul call. You might have family to speak to, friends to chat to. You can go for a bike ride. But if it's 2 a.m. and everything seems too much, Samaritans are there 24 hours a day. You can speak to them for 5 minutes or 2 hours. So it's knowing that if we're much past the point of a nice little check-in and a cup of tea, at that crisis point, there are still people, real people on the end of the phone who will be there for you.
Mm-hmm.
So we want people to know, that sort of booking an appointment in a week's time with a counsellor, lovely. What does that do for me right this second? So we want to know that if it's emergency, that there are things you can do to get support straight away.
Yeah, that's really great. Really great. The great thing about the counselling centre, as I've learned over the last few weeks, we constantly hear and read about how the sort of mental health services in the NHS are under huge pressure. It takes a very, very long time to get a referral, if at all, but you've got appointments, maybe not necessarily tomorrow, but you have the space and the time, and I don't know if subsidized is the right word, but you're a charity, so you're not charging hundreds of pounds for your 50 minutes of therapy, but you are a service for the Tunbridge Wells area that is available, maybe not at 2 a.m. in the morning for that call, but for quite short-term help. And also the goal would be that, from my point of view, and from I would assume yours as well, from talking to you, to not let it get to the point where you're phoning Samaritans at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, it's been really interesting to find out that there is this resource that is affordable and available in our area. So that's encouraging. This idea that it's Tunbridge Wells' best kept secret, that's crazy though, isn't it? It shouldn't really be a secret, but for all the reasons we've discussed today, it is. So hopefully we can change that.
Yeah. Well, I think, we can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate you answering our questions and giving us your perspective, because it's really, really hugely helpful.
Well, that's kind of, we've discussed how important external validation is to me, so I appreciate that.
No, honestly, thank you so much. We really appreciate this, and hopefully we'll be able to chat some more and get some more insight. But if you're writing your next book.
Yeah, well, look, I've becoming involved in the charity a bit more. I'm hoping that we can, keep chatting and hopefully get people in the area to come and use you if they need to. And obviously, if they've got any more questions, I'm on X, which is a fantastic social media forum. So they can definitely DM or PM me or whatever it's called if they don't want to do it in public.
Okay.
Right. And I think, and to take away from this, just sort of, if anyone's listening to this, sort of ask someone how they are, really ask them. And
no jokes. Yeah,
no jokes, have that break from the phone, go and look at a squirrel, just sort of look out for yourself and the people around you, and that's all we can do for each other.
Yeah, that's great. Well, everything you said apart from the squirrel tip has been really fantastic. So I think if people are finding happiness in invasive species, that's a sad state of affairs, but everything else fantastic. So thank you very much.